Many people think the story of Lamborghini begins with the scream of a V12 engine on some Italian piazza. But no, that is a lie. The real story begins in silence. It begins in the mud. It begins with a boy who had dirty hands while everyone else was trying to stay clean. Imagine Emilia-Romagna, Italy, 1916. The world is burning in the First World War, and in a small village called Renazzo, into a family of grape growers, Ferruccio is born. His destiny, on paper, was already written. He was supposed to be a farmer. He was supposed to watch the sky, worry about the rain, the drought, the grapes. He was supposed to inherit the land, live quietly, and die quietly. But Ferruccio, he never looked at the grapes. He looked at the tractor, pulling them. While other children played ball or helped their fathers tie the vines, little Ferruccio would disappear. They couldn't find him in the field. They couldn't find him in the house. They would always find him in a small, dark workshop next to the barn. There, surrounded by the smell of old oil and cold iron, he was happy. He took apart everything he could get his hands on. His father's tools, old machines, engine parts. His father would shout. He told him he was wasting time, that you can't eat iron. But Ferruccio had that innate, that specific kind of stubbornness possessed only by people who know something no one else knows. He heard music in mechanics. Where his father saw only a pile of useless metal, Ferruccio saw potential. He saw power. Already then, in the dust of that workshop, the force that would later shatter the world of supercars was being formed. It wasn't just skill, it was an obsession that things must work perfectly. If a machine rattles, it's not just a sound. It's a mistake, it's pain, and he had to heal it. And then, the world went mad again. World vart the Amish 2. Ferruccio was conscripted, but fate, or perhaps luck, didn't send him to the trenches to hold a rifle. It sent him to the island of Rhodes, to an aviation maintenance unit. And there, on that isolated island, cut off from the world, the real school took place. There were no spare parts. There were no new engines. There was nothing. When a truck or a plane broke down, you couldn't order a part from the factory. You had to invent it. You had to take scrap and turn it into gold. Ferruccio became a wizard of improvisation. He learned how to connect it. He learned that mechanical assemblies aren't holy scripture that mustn't be changed. They are just a problem looking for a solution. He became famous among the soldiers. If your vehicle stalls in the middle of nowhere, you call Ferruccio. He'll come, he'll curse, he'll hit it with a hammer, he'll tighten a bolt that isn't supposed to be there, and the thing will work. In those years, while Europe burned, he realized one crucial thing. A machine is an extension of a man's will. If you have the will, the machine will obey you. When the war ended in 1945, he returned home. But the Italy he returned to was not the one he left behind. It was a ruin. The economy was dead. People were hungry. The fields were neglected. Most people saw hopelessness. They saw a destroyed country that would take decades to recover. Ferruccio stood on that same land, in that same vineyard of his father. But now, he wasn't a boy hiding in a shed. He was a man with a skill forged by war. He looked around. He saw something others didn't. Everywhere, in the fields and abandoned warehouses, lay military vehicles. Abandoned American trucks, German transporters, British engines. Piles of iron that served for killing, now rusting in the rain. No one wanted them. They were a reminder of the horror. But Ferruccio smiled. He didn't see scrap. He saw the future. He knew that Italy didn't need tanks. Italy needed tractors to feed its people again. And him? He knew exactly how to turn a machine of war into a machine of life. He took his tools in his hands. And the silence of the vineyard was broken, forever. What Ferruccio did in those years, today we would call a startup. But back then, it was pure survival. He had a simple idea, brutal in its logic. Italian peasants didn't need fast trucks, they needed raw power to plow the hard, post-war earth. And fuel was scarce. Gasoline was expensive. A peasant couldn't afford it. Ferruccio started buying old military engines, mostly British Morris engines. They were cheap, there were tons of them, but they had one flaw: they ran on gasoline. And this is where the genius from Rhodes comes in. Ferruccio didn't just repaint old iron. He sat down and designed a special device, a simple fuel vaporizer that allowed those gasoline engines to run on diesel. Diesel was cheap. Suddenly, he created a machine that was powerful, indestructible, and affordable to maintain. His first tractor, named the Carioca, wasn't a beauty. It was noisy, it shook, it smoked like a locomotive, but it got the job done, and the farmers loved it. Within a few years, that dusty boy from the workshop became one of the wealthiest industrialists in Italy. The Lamborghini Trattori factory was churning out thousands of machines. Money started flowing in like a river. Ferruccio had built an empire, but money changes people, or rather money reveals who people actually are. Ferruccio didn't become a boring businessman in a grey suit, sitting in an office looking at the stock market. No! He was a man of life. He was loud, passionate. He loved fine wine. He loved women. And more than anything, he loved speed. Now he could buy everything he had dreamed of while lying under trucks on roads. And he bought it all. His garage became a museum of automotive art of that era. He bought a Jaguar E-Type, a beautiful car, a design icon. But Ferruccio would drive it, come back and say, "It's beautiful, but the brakes are weak and the ventilation is terrible." He bought a Mercedes 300 SL, the legendary Gullwing. His comment, "Too stiff. This is a German tank, not a sports car." E drove Maseratis, Lancias, Alfas, and with each one, he found a flaw. You must understand, he didn't look at those cars as status symbols. He looked at them as an engineer. He would hear a sound that shouldn't be there, feel a vibration that was unnecessary. To him, they weren't works of art, they were machines that didn't work perfectly, and he could not stand imperfection. Finally, he decided to buy the best Italy had to offer, the pinnacle of prestige, a Ferrari. He bought a Ferrari 250 GT, black, elegant, fast. The pride of Italian industry. Enzo Ferrari was the god of racing back then, untouchable. His cars were sacred. Ferruccio loved that car, but he also hated it. He drove it the way he lived, aggressively and fast. And the same thing kept happening. The clutch. The plate would slip, the gearbox would grind. Every time he stepped on the gas to overtake someone on the highway, he felt that mechanical weakness. Many people would have just taken the car to the shop, paid for the repair, and kept quiet. But Ferruccio wasn't many people. He was tired of constantly sending the car to Maranello for repairs, waiting for weeks, only for the fault to return. One day, in his garage in Cento, he decided to look into the problem himself. He ordered his mechanics, the same men who assembled tractors, to take apart the gearbox of his expensive Ferrari. When they lowered the gearbox to the floor and opened it, Ferruccio stood in shock. He stared at the part that had caused him so much trouble. It wasn't some space-age technology. It wasn't some special, unique part worthy of the prancing horse. Ferruccio took the part in his hand and started to laugh. That coarse, cynical laugh. He recognized the clutch plate. It was the exact same plate he installed in his small tractors. A commercial part, a cheap part. They were charging him a fortune for a sports car, and inside, they were putting parts for agricultural machinery. He felt cheated. But more than that, he felt insulted as a mechanic. He knew it could be done better. He knew that wasn't how things should be done. In that moment, anger overrode reason. He threw the part on the floor, got into his car, and headed for Modena. He wasn't going to complain to the mechanics. He was going straight to the old man. He was going to confront Enzo Ferrari himself. He didn't know he was driving straight into history. Ferruccio was not a man of protocol. He didn't book appointments months in advance, nor did he wait in lobbies. He arrived at the gates of Maranello the way a boss arrives, loudly and with a clear purpose. Imagine that meeting. Two titans, the two proudest men in all of Italy, eye to eye. Enzo Ferrari was a man of shadows, always behind his dark sunglasses, cold and distant, surrounded by the aura of an untouchable genius. To him, the world was a racetrack, and everything else was just a way to pay for that racing. On the other side stood Ferruccio, a man of the sun, the earth, sweat, and oil. A man who built his fortune making machines that work, not machines that dream. Ferruccio began to talk about the clutch. He talked about technical flaws, about how the car was ruining his driving pleasure, how the gear ratios could be better. He spoke as one engineer to another. He hoped, perhaps deep down, that Enzo would say, "Thank you, my friend, we will fix it." But Enzo Ferrari did not take advice, especially not from a man who smelled of manure and diesel. Enzo sized him up with that cold gaze and uttered the sentence that would become the most expensive insult in automotive history. He told him, "Lamborghini, you may be able to drive tractors, but you will never know how to handle a Ferrari. The problem is not with the car. The problem is with the driver." Then, he turned his back and walked away. In that moment, in the silence that followed in that office, something snapped inside Ferruccio. It wasn't just a bruised ego. It was the rage of a man who had spent his whole life proving he was better than people thought. That anger was cold and pure. As he drove back to his factory, his mind wasn't just filled with the image of the insult. It was filled with the image of a car. His car. He told the people around him, "I will build the best car in the world, and I will build it right here, in this factory." They thought he had lost his mind. His accountants held their heads in their hands. They told him that making sports cars was a bottomless pit, that he would waste all his tractor money on a whim that could never pay off. They told him that no one could beat Ferrari on his own turf. But Ferruccio didn't listen. For him, it was no longer a question of money. It was a question of honor. He decided to do something unthinkable. Instead of copying Ferrari, he decided to surpass him in every segment. He wanted a car that was as fast as a racing machine, but as comfortable as a limousine. He wanted an engine that didn't scream in agony, but in power. He wanted the perfection that Enzo, in his arrogance, refused to give to his customers. He began building the factory in Sant'Agata Bolognese. He chose that spot because it was close to Modena, just close enough for Enzo to feel his breath on his neck. He built the factory with incredible speed, as if racing against time itself. But machines are nothing without people. Ferruccio knew he needed the best minds, those who were crazy enough to believe in his dream, and he knew exactly where to find them. He went straight into his enemy's backyard. He looked for people who were dissatisfied, people with a vision, people who had been told to keep quiet at Ferrari or Maserati. He assembled a team of outlaws, men who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Thus began the revenge. It didn't start with weapons, but with blueprints, calculations, and sleepless nights. Ferruccio didn't just want to make a car. He wanted to create a beast that would swallow the prancing horse whole. As the symbol for his brand, he didn't choose a gentle animal or a mythical creature. He chose the bull, his zodiac sign, a symbol of strength, stubbornness, and brutal force that never swerves from its path. The bull was ready to charge. Ferruccio knew one great truth: rage without a plan is just noise. If he truly wanted to humiliate Enzo, he didn't just need a good car, he needed the best engine the world had ever seen. And this is where they come in, his outlaws. The first was Giotto Bizzarini, a man who had literally created the legendary Ferrari 250 GTO, only to find himself on the street after one of the famous arguments in Maranello. Ferruccio called him and gave him a simple but impossible task: build me a V12 engine, but not just any engine. I wanted to have more horsepower than Ferraris, but I wanted to be civilized. I want an engine that can pin you to your seat, but also runs smoothly while you're idling at a traffic light. Bizzarini went to work, but he was a racer at heart. He created an engine so extreme, so powerful, that even Ferruccio was taken aback. It was a 3.5-liter masterpiece with 4 overhead camshafts. It was a scream of the future in the middle of quiet Italy. But the chassis and the design, that's where Ferruccio showed how much he was willing to risk. While other brands hired old, proven masters, he opened the doors to youth. Gian Paolo Dallara was barely 24 years old at the time. He was a kid, practically without experience, but with a vision unchained by tradition. Ferruccio threw him and Paolo Stanzani into the fire. They worked day and night. The factory in Sant'Agata was still a construction site. The roofs leaked, the floors were bare concrete, but inside, it was boiling. These young men worked for a man who walked among them, who brought them coffee, cursed with them, and slept on that same hard ground. There was no hierarchy. There was only one mission: Turin, the 1963 auto show. That was their deadline, their judgment day. However, genius and chaos go hand in hand. As the show approached, they realized they had a massive problem. The engine and the chassis were finished, but they didn't fit. Bizzarini's engine was too tall. and the bodywork designed by Franco Agliani was too low. The hood wouldn't close. It was just a few days before they had to leave for Turin. Others would have given up. Ferruccio? He just shrugged his shoulders. Put the engine in the car, but don't connect it. Fill the space around the engine with bricks. Yes, the first Lamborghini ever presented to the world, the 350 GTV, was a fake, a beautiful, shiny deception. At the Turin show, the hood was bolted shut. Ferruccio stood by the car, smiling, pouring wine for people, and talking about the incredible performance of a machine that no one was allowed to see. People were mesmerized by the lines, the audacity, and that sign of the raging bull watching them from the hood. When they asked him why he wouldn't open the hood, he would say with his signature charm, "The engine is so powerful, it would blind you." But behind that charm, he knew he had to go back to the factory and actually build that miracle. And he did. They redesigned everything. They tamed the beast, creating the 350 GTA car that was quieter, faster, and easier to drive than any Ferrari of that time. When the first journalists sat in it, they were speechless. This wasn't a tractor. This wasn't an amateur attempt. It was the most advanced sports car on the planet. Ferruccio had achieved the impossible. In less than a year, he went from an insult in Maranello to a car that made the whole world turn its head. But while he was enjoying the victory, his young engineers were already planning something else. Something that would forever change the definition of speed. Something that would make Enzo Ferrari realize that the world had just shifted irreversibly. The bull had only just begun to run. While Ferruccio was enjoying the success of the 350 GT, he actually craved stability. He wanted to become the Italian Rolls-Royce, powerful, gentlemanly, but composed. He believed that mid-engine racing cars were dangerous, uncomfortable, and had no place on the street. "That's not for my customers," he would say. "My customers want to travel to Milan at 200 kilometers per hour without their hair getting messed up." But his outlaws, Dallara and Stanzani, were young. They weren't interested in comfort for gentlemen in suits. They were interested in revolution. At night, when Ferruccio would go home, the lights in the factory only seemed to go out. In the silence, in secret, the two of them were drawing something the world had never seen. They were working on a chassis where the engine didn't sit in the front, but transversely, right behind the driver's back. It was a pure racing configuration, something that was then reserved only for tracks like Le Mans. They knew Ferruccio would go crazy if he found out, but they also knew they were building history. When they finally showed him the blueprints, Ferruccio was silent for a long time. He stared at that radical chassis, at that engine that was literally breathing down the driver's neck. The engineers expected to be fired. They expected shouting. But Ferruccio, despite his stubborn stance, was a man who recognized genius. He looked at them and said, "Fine, we'll build it. We won't sell a single one, it will just be an advertisement for our brand, but we'll build it." He couldn't have been more wrong. The car was named Miura after a legendary line of Spanish fighting bulls. When the Miura first stepped out into the light of day, the world stopped. Literally. It was so low you could touch the asphalt with your hand while sitting in it. It had eyelashes around the headlights and lines that looked as if they were drawn by the wind itself. When Ferruccio parked it in front of the casino in Monte Carlo during the Formula One Grand Prix weekend, the roar of the racing engines fell silent. People walked out of restaurants, left their Ferraris and Rolls-Royces, and gathered around this orange beast. The Miura wasn't just a car. It was a sexual revolution in metal. It was a rock star on four wheels. Suddenly, everyone wanted it. Frank Sinatra, Rod Stewart, kings and playboys. Lamborghini was no longer the guy who makes tractors. Lamborghini had become a name spoken with awe. The Miura was the first true supercar in history. It defined everything we know by that term today. Engine in the back, two doors, a low silhouette, and speed that scares you. Ferruccio watched as Enzo Ferrari, in his pride, still refused to put the engine behind the driver, claiming that the horses pull the carriage, they don't push it. Ferruccio just smiled. He knew he had won. He hadn't just made a better car, he had changed the rules of the game. While Ferrari remained trapped in the past and tradition, Lamborghini became the future. But that fame came with a price. The factory was working to the breaking point. Ferruccio became a slave to his own success. Every car sold was proof of his genius, but also an immense pressure. There was no going back to tractors and a quiet life in the vineyard. He had become a man from whom a new miracle was expected every single morning, and in his mind, he already saw the next step. He saw something that would make the Miura look like a toy. He wanted to build a car that wouldn't just be beautiful, but a car that looked like it had fallen from the stars. It was the moment when Lamborghini stopped being just a company and became a legend. But as it goes with all legends, clouds were beginning to gather on the horizon. Ferruccio didn't know these were the final days of his absolute triumph, before life threw obstacles in his way that even the fastest car couldn't bypass. By the early 70s, Lamborghini had become something more than a car factory. It had become an idea. But Ferruccio was not a man to rest on his laurels. While the Miura was still the queen of the asphalt, he knew the competition would catch up if he didn't do something even crazier, even more aggressive. He wanted something that looked like nothing that had ever touched the ground. That was when he appeared Marcello Gandini, young, quiet, but with an imagination that reached decades into the future. When they were working in secret on the successor to the Miura, the goal wasn't to make a beautiful car. The goal was to create shock. The result was a prototype under the code name LP500. The story goes that one of the workers in the factory, when he first saw the finished car, shouted in his local Piedmontese dialect, "Counter!" It was an expression men used when they saw an incredibly beautiful woman, something like, "My God," or "Look at that." The name stuck, Countach. When they rolled it out in front of the public in 1971, there was a stunned silence. This wasn't a car. It was a wedge. Sharp edges, doors that opened upwards like the wings of a predator, a low line that looked like it was cutting the air even while standing still. The Miura was sensual, but the Countach was brutal. It looked like a craft left behind by aliens in the middle of Italy. This was the pinnacle of Ferruccio's power. He proved to the world that the Miura wasn't a fluke. He set a standard that would grace the walls of children's bedrooms for the next 30 years. Every poster, every dream of speed, from that moment on, had that unmistakable shape. Ferruccio stood in the center of that chaos, enjoying every moment. He had become an icon, the man who went from tractors and an insult to dictating fashion to the entire planet. He was the king of Sant'Agata. But while he was celebrating, the world around him began to change in ways that even he, with all his wealth and defiance, could not control. The peak of the mountain is always the narrowest, and the wind blows hardest there. Ferruccio was at the very top, but beneath him, the ground was already starting to crumble. Big dreams require a lot of fuel, and the world was just about to run out of it. Life has a cruel habit of hitting you the hardest right when you think you are invincible. For Ferruccio, those blows didn't come from the competition, nor from the racetrack. They came from a world he didn't care for, from politics and global economics. It all started with the tractors, the very thing that built everything. His tractor factory, Lamborghini Trattori, received a massive order from South America, from Bolivia. Thousands of machines were ready, the workers had put in overtime, and he had invested all his capital into materials and production. And then, overnight, a military coup happened in Bolivia. The new government simply said, "We don't need your tractors, we won't pay a cent." Ferruccio found himself in a trap. He had thousands of tractors that no one wanted, and millions in debt that he had to repay. As if that wasn't enough, in 1973, the world was hit by the oil crisis. Suddenly, gasoline became a precious commodity, and his cars, those beautiful roaring beasts that swallowed gallons in minutes, became enemies of society. People began to look at supercars as a shame, as relics of a past age. Ferruccio looked at his factory, at his workers whom he loved like family, and he saw everything collapsing. Labor unions began to strike, and the atmosphere in Sant'Agata became dark and heavy. He, who had created everything from nothing, was now watching everything slip through his fingers. He was not a man who would allow the company to rot while he was at the helm. He made the most painful decision of his life. He decided to sell it all. First, he sold the tractor factory to his competitor, the company Same. Then, piece by piece, he sold his beloved car factory as well. Imagine that moment. The man who created a legend out of an insult now had to sign a paper confirming that he no longer owned a single bolt of that dream. Many thought he would stay, perhaps as an honorary president. But that wasn't him. If he didn't hold the key, If he didn't decide on every clutch and every engine, then it was no longer his home. One afternoon, without any grand ceremony, without speeches or cameras, Ferruccio simply packed his things, got into his car, and drove through the gates of Sant'Agata. He didn't look back. He returned to where it all began, to the earth. He bought an estate in Umbria called La Fiorita. The man who created the fastest cars in the world now spent his days driving an old tractor through vineyards. He made wine that he called the blood of the bull. He watched from a distance as his company passed from hand to hand, surviving bankruptcies, crises, and new owners. It was a strange, quiet end for a man who had been so loud. It was a peace he likely hated, but a peace he needed. The bull retreated into the silence, leaving the world to wonder what was left of that rage that changed everything. The years in the vineyards of Umbria flowed slower than those in the factory. Ferruccio grew old, but that spark in his eyes, the same one he had while taking apart his father's machines in a dusty shed, never faded. People who visited him in his retirement said he was peaceful, but his face would light up every time he heard the distant roar of a powerful engine passing by on the road. He knew that sound. That was the sound of his name. Ferruccio Lamborghini passed away in 1993 at the age of 76. He was buried just as he had lived, with honors, but also with the scent of the earth. On his grave in his hometown of Renazzo stands that same symbol of the bull. He was sent off on his final journey by a procession of cars, but not ordinary ones. It was the most expensive and fastest funeral cortege in history, made of Miuras, Countachs, and Diablos. His company survived. It went through difficult years, changed owners, and finally, under the wings of Audi and the Volkswagen Group, found the stability that Ferruccio never had. Today, Lamborghini is a symbol of technological perfection. Every Aventador, Huracan, or Rivielto that rolls out of those same gates in Sant'Agata carries the DNA of that first clutch that slipped on a Ferrari 60 years ago. But the true value of what Ferruccio left behind isn't in carbon fiber or top speed. His legacy is a lesson in the human spirit. He showed us that an insult can be the most powerful fuel. He proved that one man, armed only with defiance and knowledge, can challenge the gods of industry and beat them on their own turf. The Lamborghini brand today is not just a car manufacturer. It is a monument to audacity. It is a reminder that, no matter how much someone belittles you or tells you that you belong in the fields with tractors, you alone choose how far you will go. When you see that bull on the hood today, remember that it doesn't just represent wealth. It represents the rage of a boy from the vineyard who refused to stay silent. It represents the moment a farmer decided that Enzo Ferrari wasn't the only one allowed to dream. And as long as there is even one boy dreaming in his garage about something the world deems impossible, Ferruccio will be alive. Because a Lamborghini is not just a car. It is the way you answer the world when it tells you that you aren't good enough. And the next time you hear that roar of an engine behind you, don't just look at the machine. Look at the man who had the courage to create it.